Kansas. I'd like to have you help me welcome our very own Hall of Fame and living legend, Mr. Professor Anthony Harris.
Is it on? Yeah, there it is. And so the main thing here is to get a lid turned. It's a fairly long, last time I did this demo, it took it an hour and 20 minutes. And so maybe all we do today is turn the lid if we run out of time. I started out making the boxes like this. It's just a round, does it work? Yeah, round bottom, see-through lid. What you do is you turn it eccentrically and you turn it round on one side, eccentrically on the other, and you cut it halfway through, and where it crosses, you can see light. And so I started experimenting with other things I might do, and trying to make the bigger box with a lid on it was interesting. I don't really know what they're good for. Potpourri, well, I see. And I started doing a little bit of design shape on it. You can't see. You have to come up and look at them later, I guess. But I put the same kind of set on the lid and the base. I started making, I didn't like the knob, and so I started making them so that you can just flip them over. And they don't have a knob at all, and you can have a concentric circle, or you can make the eccentric one on top. This is a new one I've tried. Someone told me that, boy, that looks like something you'd burn incense in. And he looked at me and says, is that what you're going to do with it? It's burn incense in it or something? I said, well, I hadn't thought about that really. He says, well, you ought to make it like that then. And so, okay. Okay, a little less breathy. Okay, so we're going to make a lid. It's eccentrically turned. This is a cross-grained piece of wood. The grain runs across the bed. It's like a bowl. It's not a spindle. I've already cut one tenon on it, and this is a tenon that I'm going to use this chuck on later. But it needs another tenon. And so I've done part of the work already, right? I've got it mounted. It's on a tenon. That's going to stay there. I've turned a concentric tenon on the front of this piece. Okay? Now I'm going to cut the lid off. And I'm kind of being real open about how big things are. I don't measure a whole lot. And it's not because I don't like to measure, it's just that when I measure it doesn't work anyhow, so. I guess there's one thing I've forgotten to say. I've marked the center here, so I'm going to be able to find it later, and I made this flat. It's fairly important that it be flat. You don't want it to be dished or to be domed. What I'm going to do is to make certain the top of this is flat, so both sides are flat. It's not far. You have to. I think you almost have to do the eccentric ones first. And the reason is because once you get the cuts from both sides, it becomes relatively fragile. And you can't afford to be swinging things eccentrically and cutting air, just cutting part of it. That's close. That's good enough, okay? I'm going to use a stem center for the front end. And I've taken the center out of the tail center, taking the point out of the tail center so it doesn't penetrate the wood very far. How far is good to make things eccentric. When I first started making them, I went way too far. And what it turns out, I kind of like this stem center because if I put one side on the center of this, that displaces it just the right amount. I'll show you what it looks like. I don't know how far that is. How close can we see here? Looks like I've got it even further out than I thought. The center, let's do it from this direction. The actual center of the turning is right here, and I've made I've missed it. Not far, not bad, it's close. And I mean, you can do anything you want, but it turns out that this works real well. And when I was thinking about doing it for demonstrations, I was thinking about how I can do this relatively quickly. Why did I make the two sides real flat? It's so that this runs true. This is what's important. When I'm going to cut another tenon on here, and when I cut this tenon, if my piece is not running true, then when I make the cuts from both sides, they'll meet on this side and not meet over here. So if I get it to run exactly straight, that's not very clear, is it? I'm going halfway through on each side. If the piece is like this on the lathe, then it will cut all the way through here, and not over there. Then you have to do it all by hand, and nobody wants to do that. So I'm going to cut a smaller tenon on this other side, one for turning the eccentric surface. Check my speed. I want the diameter of this second tenon to be pretty close to a known diameter. I don't want it to be bigger or smaller. And the reason is because I'm going to use a dovetail chuck that we have. And dovetail chucks like to form a circle when you close the jaws. Let's see, is that getting close? Yes.
Pass around some examples. I know you have a number of
Yes. Pass them all around.
at 'em while they're-
Go ahead. Oh, no. Yeah, maybe that's enough. And come get more if you want. It doesn't matter. So, I want the small tenon to be this diameter. That's where the chuck works best, when these are almost but not quite closed. And it looks like I'm still a little too big. Okay, one more cut, you think? I need to make it a dovetail. There we go. Okay, so I'm chucked up on my eccentric tenon, and I'm getting ready to cut the eccentric, I don't know what they call that. I'm going to cut eccentric rings. How's that? And I'm not going to worry too much about these marks. I'll take them off later. I'll show you the tool in just a second. Let me get the height adjusted. This tool is made like a badan. Everybody knows what that is. It's a French skew. It's a little bit skinny, though, but it has the same cutting profile as a badan. That means it's got a bevel on the front, and the top is flat. The sides should be straight, and the top is a little bit wider than the bottom, so you have a relief when you cut. And all I'm going to do is cut little rings. Now, the other thing to say about this, I don't have a handle on it. This is all real delicate stuff. You can't manhandle anything. And the fact that it's round means that I can let it find its own place. Once I start the cut, if I have my tool leaning over, not only does it start catching, but it creates a real wide cut. And so what I do is I don't even hang on to this very hard, and I let it find its own smallest opening. It will find its own height. And when I made that cut, the tool actually spun a little bit. It moves sideways because what it's going to do is, I'm having trouble describing it. What it's going to do is orient itself to match this height and that circle. That's what it boils down to. Yeah, and I permit it to. I let it spin. I guess we ought to find out how thick that is. And I'm just, how thick do I think those ought to be? Well, I don't know. I'm going to make them that thick. That is the primary challenge, yeah. And what happens if you get some rings significantly deeper than others, when you cut from the other side, everything flies apart. Yeah. When I started thinking about how to make this first time, there we go. I thought I was going to have rings on just one side, right, and had the other flat. Well, what happens is when those concentric rings get small enough, they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? When you get to the point where you've cut one side off, the whole thing just kind of comes out. It was kind of disappointing when it happened. But it's interesting to. It's not quite the way I wanted it, but it's kind of interesting to cut it with a hole in the middle. Someone tells me I have to put something else in there. But it was one of those things I was really excited about. This tool, the first time I used it, Weissflog, he was using it in Provo, Utah. And he made some Saturn boxes where the captive ring came loose. And so I made it for that. And I had seen this in a magazine 15 or 20 years ago that people were making trivets. Okay, so I've cut through all the solid wood. And now I'm going to be cutting partly wood and partly air. And nothing really changes. It feels a little bumpier. I suspect that if you muck it up at this point, it's more exciting. I mean, it will shatter more excitingly. Now, one of the things to consider here is you can't come back, right? So however deep I make this thing, then I have to meet it from the other side, regardless of how I end up with it. Okay? Let's see what happens. Now, so what's the first thing you're going to do, right? We want to smooth this side off. What do? Well, you get out here with your gouge. Then we have to drop this a little. Uh-oh. And you just cut it off, right? Yeah, but it blows up if you do that. And so what I had to do was I actually turn it over, and I'm using this real sheer scrape cut. And that's how I can clean up all this torn area. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but each of the edges is a little frayed. What I discovered was that if you turn this so you bring that edge in a little more, it'll cut more efficiently, and it flakes off pieces, and it ruins everything. So you just have to take this really light cut. It's not very much fun. See what happened. It never occurred to me. It has to be flat, though. See, this isn't good enough yet. It has to be flat. Okay, let's just pretend that's good enough. Okay, I'm going to sand it. I'm going to use the abrasive paper. See? And I'm also, since I have that little dimple right in the middle where the tail center touched. I'm going to make it into a feature. Let's go. See? Slow down to sand. And like I said before, this is the only time I'm ever going to get this chance. And so if I'm going to sand it, it has to be now. Oh, alternatively, you could hand sand it. But that's, you know, we don't do that. Yes, yes. And so the paper bends around the corner. Uh-oh. Theoretically. There we go. Okay, now, these outer ones where they don't go all the way around, you can't do it when it's running. They have to be done by hand. I know this isn't very exciting. I won't do it very much. Look at that. It's broken. Let me say I don't care. And you're going to see why in just a minute. Oh, yeah. I kind of like the thinner ones, but because I'm making a demo and you don't want to mess up, I decided to make them thicker. Okay, so a little bit of abrasive paper on the surface here. A little more abrasive paper on the surface here. So, but you did see it, right? I was making it flat. Yeah, it's important. Now let's do a little bit of real. There we go. This is finest grit I'll use. It's 400. It's I'm trying to think of what they call this wood. It's the what's the softest maple that comes up north with the red stain? The red stain. What? Box elder. Box elder is what it is. It's the softest of the maples. Put the big chuck back on. Go back to the original. Oh, I guess I haven't used this tenon yet. Here we go. Now, it's cross grain, right? So I can't cut that direction. And that's what I want to do, right? What I'm going to have to do is cut this direction. And remember, the one edge of this was a little torn, right? Well, I'm cutting it off right now. And I'm also deciding how big my lid's going to be. I think I'll make it a little smaller. I'm liking more and more these undercut bowls, the bottoms, and so that requires a little bit smaller lid. Okay. have to cut this way, remember, because of the direction of the grain. There you go. Well, I'm going to do it once more. I apologize. One more cut, you know. Okay. Now, it may not be apparent on the surface of this, but there are little hooky things going around in circles, right? And so if I stick my sandpaper in there, it'll grab the sandpaper if it can. So there we go. I'm going to bend the sandpaper like that. I can't do it. Okay. Bend it so it doesn't have an edge to catch. Okay. Put the bottom of the bowl back in. And now what I need to do is make a jam chuck. When I started making these, what I did was I made them just like a normal box, and I would cut a hole right here that this would fit in. And it worked just great. And you're cutting along, I start in the middle, and I was cutting out, and the further out you get, the more spongy it gets. And you get about halfway out, and there's no strength left in it, and it won't stay. It will compress. It makes a spring is what it does. And so what I've learned is I have to leave something under it and jam it up against that. That's why I'm always excited to make sure this is flat. Now I'm cutting a little bit of mortise because I want it to be self-centering. I'm not going to use this anymore. It's Chinese tool. I sharpened it just before I came here. Okay, it's starting to fit inside. Still needs a little more. It's not flat yet. Right now it's dished like this. It must fit inside. I'm going to hold this with the tail center, and if it becomes spongy, weak in the process, and I push on it with the tail center, it breaks. So it has to have something to push up against. You can't leave it cantilevered over air. There we are. Okay, found a nice center. Have we made it flat? Well, we can pretend that it's flat, or we can look and find out. It would be nicer if I had a little bit of a wider thing here, but this is adequate. Let's see what that feels like. Okay, we'll try. Now, I still have the original marks. See the ring there? That's still the eccentric. Oh. Yeah, isn't that interesting? I usually do it a little different. Normally, I have a ring on there that fits the maybe I still do. Yeah. I haven't tightened it yet. I haven't scored the wood. I have not compressed anything. Once you start making dents, you can't get away from them, right? You bring the tailstop up again, and it goes back into the original dents. Okay, and so that runs pretty good. So I'm going to approximately identify the size of the lid. I'm going to cut this outside part, which has too much material on it, down to the size of the lid, the finished lid. There we go. Now, there's a whole bunch of extra material here that I don't use, and that's going to be the knob. Right, that part that gets that's sticking out here is the knob. This This thickness is fairly important. Too thin and it becomes weak. Too thick, it's a little clumsy. Too thick and my little tool won't cut that far. It's just all kinds of problems. I don't know a good way to measure this. I tried everything. I tried black magic marker. I tried tape, to set a depth on here. I found nothing. And so I overheated it once when I sharpened it, and it turned kind of black, and so that's what I used. That's what I'm doing when I'm looking from the side here. I'm going to go a little deeper, I think. A little thinner, I mean. I'm using real similar to cuts what I was using when I talked about cutting the other side, shaving the other side. I don't want anything to lift on me. I want to keep this top relatively flat, though you could dome this side if you wanted. And this cut starts without a bevel, and it kind of rolls into a supported cut. Better than that, than lose the tip. So it hasn't gone through yet. I do not know of an alternative to doing this. The only other thing, well, there is an alternative. What you do is you take take it out and look at it. And that always scares me because can I get it back in exactly right? Have I cut halfway through? Have I gotten to the other? What? Okay. I'm going to take some more off. And so you see what not measuring things, the kind of problems it gives you, right here? I can't tell. Okay, here we go. Okay. Try to put it back in exactly the same spot. Things go wiggly if you don't. Now there's another problem with this tool. As I cut in, this tool starts running up against the center, and my tool has to go in at an angle, so the ring's actually going in. I could make a new tool. A new tool could be made to solve that. All right? Yeah. Say it. When you hear it, yeah. Yeah. There's a very specific one when you mess up. It's called, oh, oh. It's generally not the first clue, though. That sound is the lid chattering. Anything you don't get cut here, you have to do with a dental pick. It's almost the same as sanding. We don't like that either. Okay. Okay. I guess this one you might be able to come back for, right, if you wanted to. Let's think about that. I don't know if you could or not. Ooh, did you hear it? What that means is that thing I'm pushing against is dished a little. There you go. I'm going to make a little lid on this. I better do it fairly soon or it's going to get weak. Okay. Still needs a little help. Turn it off. Yeah, we don't need it anymore. So just how deep is it? Not that deep. Leaving the lip here for the lid to ride on. Turn the tool up on its side. You can only turn it on its left side, right? You can't turn it on its right. And that permits you to make a slightly tighter curve. It's worse on concrete. I'm going to undercut it. This is the Kevin Neely tool. I just say that so in case I go through, I have someone to blame. I can go a little deeper. What? Yeah, that's right. Cut thin to win. So I've got a fairly good curve on the bottom. Underneath the rim, you don't get to see it anyhow, so I'm not real excited about it. But where those two cuts meet, it's always a little bit more difficult to get it nice and clean. And this is not a real good tool for doing it because it's bouncy. This one can't get into the corner, and so I'm using this modified tool to get right at the corner. Join the two cuts. That's what I meant to say. Okay, let's see what happens. Make it a little bit cleaner. I think I'm going to, I don't know what you call this. I like this stuff. It's almost a Roman ogee. No, I mean, I've done it on 3 or 4 of them. It's not, no, it's not a guga, is it? Okay. Plenty of room there. Now I get into, I'm going against the grain a little bit here. This cut's okay, the start of it here. But as you get around the corner, you're cutting the wrong direction, right, according to the grain. And so you have to be real careful with what you do with the bevel. You can, well, here, look. No, that's the one. You can see where it's shattered. Well, maybe you can't see it. That one? That's still not it, boss. Oh, there it is, see? And so you see this shattered area here? That's because I pushed too hard and it's the wrong direction, and so it tears. But this surface is okay because the bevel was writing on it. Still go further. Put a little more curve on it. Okay, let's quit. We'll do something else now. Real lightly, we'll sand some of it. I lied. There's one more thing that has to happen. I cut this rim in there, right? But I cut this part of the rim okay that the lid's going to fit on, but there's it goes through the scoop, and then there's a flat part, and I haven't cleaned that up. It is still the real rough cut that I used with my scraper. And so what I'm going to do is touch it with this bottom side of my gouge. Oh. I've been using, mostly I've been using a lacquer to finish inside and out. I don't like shiny lacquer, and so I use satin lacquer. You see I've rolled the sandpaper. No, you can't. There we go. I rolled the sandpaper so that I can get in these coves. No, these are actually sprayed. I mean, like as though they're furniture. I only use that. There's a real nice method I like to use. Pardon me. There's a real nice method I like to use by flooding a piece with lacquer and then giving it just a second to kind of soak in and then wiping it back off. And so you end up with nothing on the surface, but still the material that's soaked into the wood. And then you can buff it, and it doesn't have the problem that waxes have. You know, if you get something that has only a wax finish, if you get it wet, it spots, and those spots never, well, not never. You have to almost sand it to get the spots out. But if you put on a base coat of either lacquer or, what's the other thing? What? Bullseye shellac, there. I bought the reason I use the shellac is because I bought a can of it once and kind of sprayed something with it and didn't like it, and so it sat for 10 years, and I thought, well, what am I going to use now? And so just something as a bottom coat, right, to get underneath. Soak a little bit of it in. I guess it was Sharp Tools out in Grain Valley. There was a guy who came there, and he showed us 50% lacquer and 50% lacquer thinner. And he would flood the bowl, run it real fast to burn the carrier off, and then buff. And so that's essentially the same thing I'm doing. You have to be a little careful sanding the inside. This corner can be a little sharp, leaves little marks on your fingers. Okay, now there's lots of ways to do the bottom of this. I'm going to show you something that's real quick and easy. To be expected, okay? I have had it work with a bigger chuck, but it doesn't generally. And I'm just going to put it on there. And if you are careful, you don't squeeze it too hard, the taper on the dovetails pulls the piece of material up against the flat bottom of the jaw. If you don't squeeze it too hard, it doesn't damage that little rim in there. Now, did we measure how deep this was? What? What? Well, that's never going to work. This is getting dull. Notice the direction I'm cutting again. It's because it's cross-grain material. Anybody need a ringy dingy? That's all right. Here it is. Here it is. These are the fibers of a piece of wood. They have, they're just essentially a bunch of straws. Okay? And so if you cut this fiber, where this fiber still exists behind it to backstop it, it can't run away and it gets cut. Alternatively, if you cut this direction, there's nothing out here behind this fiber, and so when my tool touches it, it spreads out and then tears. And not only does it make your cuts difficult to control, it tears grain so that it's not pretty, it's much slower. The wood on this piece runs this direction, and so in order to cut downhill from short to long fibers, I have to cut this direction. If it's a spindle, cutting from short to long fibers, I cut this way. So turning's divided into two big chunks, right? There's spindle turning and there's cross grain turning. Cross grain turning has lots of terms. We used to call it bowl turning, faceplate turning, but essentially it means the grain runs across the bed. So, and the tools can change also, but they don't have to. I don't know how deep this is. We're just going to take some of it off, though. I can't leave it. $5 to the first guy that sees daylight. Okay, we're going to do that. Here we go. You mean stand on the other side? Well, it's been a long time since I tried, but when I did it, I would have just horrendous catches, and so it's left this mark in my psyche. I won't stand. Yeah, I won't stand on the other side and turn. Sorry? Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter. Spindle turners, more than bowl turners, have to, that's kind of fun. Spindle turners, more than bowl turners, have to learn to use either hand. So here's a right-handed cut. Here's a left-handed cut. You have to learn both. I don't know if I've done this before or not. I know I've done it with other kinds of boxes. Yeah, I'm not going to use this. Cool. So just how thick is the bottom? Those are gugas. You knew we weren't going to get away with that song. I don't know what it is yet. I don't feel done with the gugas. What do you think we ought to do? We'll put it in the bottom. We really don't know how thick that is. The top's got a hole in it. Somebody today was talking to me about gluing extra pieces in. I didn't like that at all. Where'd he go? Okay. Oh. Have you ever seen this? Arm up against the lathe, hand grab the hand that's doing the sanding. Anytime I sand something small, I mean, it's become habitual. I don't even think about it anymore. But it's a nice, solid, steady platform. Okay. Okay, so if we're going to put gugas in the bottom, uh-oh. Starting to look beehive-ish. Okay. I don't know what else to do. So where's the lid? Who got the lid? Right next to me. Yeah. Oh. Little box. Still needs the top of the knob, something done to it. That's the first time I've done a wood that soft. Normally I stick around cherry or walnut. I made some out of some exotics. Osage orange works real nice. I used this one because it was something I'd used as a backstop for a previous one, so it was already turned round. I have not. I actually brought 2 pieces. You know, I picked up 2 of them. They were on my bench. So I hadn't decided which one to use. And I chose that one because it was cross grain. Every single one of these I've made thus far has been cross grain. And I don't know why I don't make them out of end grain. Maybe they crack sideways if you get them too thin or something, but I haven't even tried. It just seems like a lost cause before I even try. So maybe next time I'll try. Yeah. Yeah, this is all dry wood. But it doesn't require big pieces, and I don't know, it seems like a good idea. I got to tell you though, once, I don't remember the Chinese things, the balls you would pick up and do that with? I found some Korean War era tank ball bearings, inch and 3/8, inch and a quarter, and I thought, oh, those are so cool. And they came inside, came in cosmoline, wrapped in aluminum foil, inside, each individually inside of an aluminum canvas bag, 5 of those inside of a bigger aluminum canvas bag. And I thought, oh, I just got to have those. And I'm going to make those Chinese things and just sell the heck out of them. And I started making boxes. That's why I started chasing threads, actually. And I never did sell any of them. So this seems like it ought to be a good one, too. I don't have any more to say. The questions? Oh, okay.
What's going to be our challenge for February?
Turn something eccentric. Yeah, and it has nothing to do with your uncle. Good. Yes. 15 or 20 years ago, in the in the AAW magazine, someone made a trivet for putting hot food dishes on, and it was about 10 or 12 inches across, maybe 8 to 10 inches across, and it had a big set of rings on the top and 3 small ones on the bottom, and they went halfway through, and you could see through it, and that's where I got it from. But I mean, I started making them, 14 months ago, but I hung on to that idea, and I knew I wanted to do something eventually, and I did it. So just